Graphic.
Pushing the average.
Yeah, you can see the start.
Back with the numbers.
Yeah. It's the old time, it's
America's
trying to
Cup.
feed
Hi,
those.
how are you? I'm Wong.
Yeah.
The auditor.
For the auditor.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Sure.
Who takes our roll? You do? Are we ready to go here? Let's see, if we missing anybody? Bob? Oh, here it is. I guess we're all here. So why don't we open the meeting and have you call the roll?
Chairman Khan,
Here.
Vice Chairman Diane Sandu,
Here.
Mayor Lewis,
Here.
Vice Mayor Carlson,
Here.
Mr. Anthoven,
Here.
Mr. Massey,
Here.
and Mr. Cleo.
Here.
Do we have any public members present other than our reporter? Do you have any comments you would like to make?
Me? Yes, I'm a public member here, just to observe the Finance Committee. I'm thinking of applying. I understand there will be a vacancy. My name is Naomi Ramsden, longtime Atherton resident, and have the time now to take an interest and have some expertise in financial matters.
Great.
All right. Thank you for being here. Do you have any other comments before we go on? You're just an observer, is that what you're saying?
Just an observer.
If you have any questions, feel free to ask them as we go along.
Thank you very much.
All right, the minutes, approve the minutes, the next item.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right, that's taken care of.
Who seconded it? Mr. Massey?
Mr.
No.
Polito.
Mr. Cleo.
All right, the next item is item 4, which is entitled, what is it? Correction cure discussed not at the time. All right, the concern is that the discussion we had with the auditor last time in private may not have been appropriate under the Brown Act. So in order to correct that, the attorney was recommending that we just redo it without excusing the finance director and ask the same questions. And if we don't ask the questions that you remember that we did ask, you feel free to answer them if we don't get them all. I've written down a few that I remember.
Ray, can I ask a question? I had to leave and the group was.
I wasn't here.
What happened, what transpired to put us in violation of law?
Well, what happened is I was under the impression that we could talk to the auditor in private on personnel matters. So at the end of our discussion, we did that, and they excused Robert, and then they're saying that.
But I didn't know you said it right there, personnel matters.
Right.
Yeah.
If I had metal lamps, I should have known better, but
Blues and I were excused, we knew better when we were gone.
We would have jumped all over you.
Thank you.
And then we worked out a resolution to recommend to the council after we go through this. If you support it, we'll move it on and try and correct it in the future. And I think in this guidance from the attorney, he said, you know, that anything that we did, we thought we were adopting the rules because we thought it was a personnel matter and it would have been excluded. So there was no intent to violate the act.
Right, no, I didn't think so, it's just, that's like, you do it accidentally.
All right, and I went back and reviewed the videotape. You probably don't remember what we asked in public and what we asked in private, because there was only 2 or 3 questions that I remember. So I'll just, to get it on the record, I'll just ask the questions that I think we covered, and you can respond as you did before.
I don't remember exactly, but
Yeah, right.
I'll try.
All right, I think one of the questions we asked you was whether the staff cooperated with you and were candid in your discussions with them. Is it?
Yes.
Do you remember that? That's
Correct, yes. And I think my response was, I think I worked with Robert, you know, is a new finance director, and before that was, last year was Deborah Auger. So, but our experience has always been, staff has always been very cooperative and has been straightforward. And I think, and I believe my response is, I will know better after our interim audit testing with Robert as a new finance director for current year fiscal year audit.
All right, I think another question we asked you is whether you did any additional work because of the new employees or not, and whether you felt comfortable with what you did.
Correct. Because as part of audit process, what we do is we look at the we do a risk-based assessment. So
Assessment?
correct. So and we look at if the system is still the same, meaning you know, if the software is still the same, is it still are the same people still doing the process and doing the review and doing the approval. And in this case, there was a change last year because Louis Ho left and Deborah Auger came in, so we had to do additional testing. But and this year we will be doing additional testing also because now that there's a new finance director, we'll be required to basically we'll be required to test the disbursement cycle, the receipt cycle, and the payroll cycle. So we will test all those pick samples and test them again this year, because so we are coming in next week. So at the end of next week we will know better. So.
And if I recall, the additional work you did not charge, and I want to thank you for that again.
No, we did not. Correct. Yes.
Is there any areas where Robert or some of his staff could help you more? Reduce the fee, maybe?
Not that we are aware of any right now.
All right, did you get all the information you feel you needed to do the audit?
For last year, yes. So for fiscal year 13 audit, we are just starting next week, but so we will know better when we start field work on Monday. But we do not anticipate any issue.
And do you have any other recollections, Joyce?
No, and I didn't ask any questions, so I don't have any. I think you covered what I remember.
Bob, do you have anything that we asked him last time that I didn't cover?
I have a general recollection, because, I mean, it was done at your, you requested us to proceed, and I thought the questions that you asked, as I recall them, were well within what I considered the scope and responsibility of an audit finance committee. The fact that this doesn't function like the sector I'm used to working in was...
Well, I think we all struggle from that. For sure. We're used to dealing with the private sector, and the Brown Act, I think, puts a different perspective on how we communicate with people.
So my question for the attorney was, how do we get questions like that answered? And I think you've...
Well, George and I worked out a resolution that after we finish this, I will discuss it with you, we can decide whether we want to vote on it.
But that's all I thought it was well within our scope, but we obviously...
Are there any questions we're not asking you that other audit committees would, or should, or have, that are significant?
Typically, what we do, there is, as part of the audit, we have a communication with the Audit of Finance Committee, and talk about our audit scope, our planning. And so typically, we do that after we've done our interim work. So it will be after next week, and I will set up an appointment and meet with the audit committee, and that's when I would discuss about the audit timing, the plan, the scope, and also to go through questions on fraud considerations. And the question, so that's where the communication is. During that time, then usually the finance audit committee, there will be conversation about fraud. So
Yes, and I think you're really our only protection, not our only, but one of our major protections on major fraud. And I think because you have the access and the day-to-day knowledge that would be able to identify and help. Because I mean, our bottom line is we certainly don't want to wind up in a situation like Bell.
correct.
But I think that you're our only independent access on a significant basis that would be able to do that. And I think our questions to you were really intended to make sure that you got something on your mind that you said. And I think that's why it's normally done in private, to make sure that you're candid with your responses. And as a result of that, the motion I'm about to move. I can find it.
I think I just want to clarify that as you probably know, we are independent auditors, so we are engaged to do a financial statements audit, and as part of it, we are required to look at the internal control and ask questions, certain questions about fraud. However, we do not. This is not a fraud audit. So if it's a fraud audit, it's a lot more detailed, and the scope is very, the work and scope is very different. However, if during part of our work, if we see any area that we deem susceptible to fraud or we suspect fraud has occurred, we are required to communicate to the council and to those charged with governance. So basically, in this case, would be definitely to the council and the audit of finance committee.
How does that communication occur usually?
Okay. How does communication?
Is it-
If you had something significant, how would you communicate with the council and the committee?
So typically, what we do is it will be at least 2 levels above. So
Would you go to the audit chairman, for example?
So in this case, it depends on which level of fraud there is. So in this case, let's say it's a accounting technician. So if it's a accounting technician, the 2 levels above will be his level. He reports probably to Robert, and Robert's boss is the city manager. So I will report to George. And if so that's how the communication is.
Does the Brown Act prevent you from having a frank discussion closed that's only audit committee members?
Correct. So.
Yes, it does prevent you.
Well, that's right, and my motion's going to address
Has to
that,
be a public
Alan, that's the problem.
Yeah. So
My motion will address that, and
Is there any prohibition of a one-on-one communication between
no.
the audit
Yes.
manager and?
As audit
Yes.
member.
yes.
I challenge that.
With the city council?
No, with the chair of
Of
the
the
audit committee.
finance committee.
Since I'm not on the council, the question is whether he would have,
If he had a concern
Yes.
about, let's say Robert.
Yes.
Because
And
it's
so
personnel.
two levels above,
Cannot-
there's
Two
That's
levels above is the
personnel.
city council.
Yeah,
well, but why not go to the audit chair?
no,
Well,
That's the role.
because it's personnel matter.
It's a personnel-
Personnel
criminal.
No,
matters
it's not
only
a
go
personnel
through.
matter, it's a fraud matter.
No,
Oh, that's
it's
what he was talking about. He was saying personnel matter.
Well,
from,
but
For
what if
fraud.
but what if it's not a personnel matter, but it's just seriously concerned about,
Like a procedural matter or
Yeah.
something.
There's no closed
not
session.
personnel matters, I imagine he could.
You cannot go into closed session to discuss.
right.
No, not a closed
anything
session,
about personnel?
but a one-on-one communication.
Oh, you
Yeah,
mean the auditor
right.
speaking to the
One-on-one
chair?
communication.
Yes, no
Yeah.
problem.
That's
As
what
long as it's
Yeah,
not
exactly.
personal.
But not,
Absolutely.
but not about a personnel issue.
Right.
Correct.
Because remember, we, other than them, don't work for the town. Only people that are employees can have an employee conversation. We can't have that. Right? We're not allowed to bring that up. We're not allowed to have that.
The finance committee
conversation.
doesn't have, it's not within their charge
It's not
to
within their
address
charge.
personnel issues, that rests with the city council. The auditor can meet with the chair independently on their own, not a problem. on any issue, even if it is a suggestion that there might be fraud, which is a quasi-personnel matter. That's not a problem. The recommendation that I think your chair is working toward is that as this body approves the annual audit or makes a recommendation to the city council, concurrent with that recommendation is the suggestion that the two-member city council members sitting on this committee meet independently and separately with the auditor prior to the audit going before the city council to discuss any potential issues that haven't been discussed here. And then if there are concerns that need to be reported to the council, report them to the council at the time that the council considers the audit.
George, could you do your presentation? I'll run home and get that resolution, because there's no sense in my trying to wing it when I've got 10 copies sitting in my printer, and I just got it, I'm less than 5 minutes away.
The presentation.
On your budget? And then we'll come back to this after I return.
I think there was only one other thing I remember
Oh,
that
okay.
came up, and it was in your report, you brought the attention that the HR module has never been
Correct.
implemented,
Correct.
which is a checks and balances,
Mhm.
which not necessarily would reflect for fraud, but it would certainly be an overlap financially and overall management. And then I think when Robert returned, or maybe before, I can't really remember, sorry.
I think he was here, weren't you
I
here
think
for that?
you might have
When we talked about the HR model?
Yeah.
When we talked
Yeah.
about the internal control,
Yeah,
that was
that was-
before.
Yeah, all of that, I think
Yeah.
we discussed what Robert was
So
in.
then we're good.
Pretty clear.
And isn't that one reason that it hasn't been implemented is because we have so few employees in the, at this point, that the HR module is really supposed to take into consideration more than 9 employees?
It's not the quantity, it's the fact that if you don't, if you're paying for a module for
Mhm.
maintenance that you don't even implement, you're
Mhm.
paying for something that is wasteful. And the HR module is designed for guidelines
Mhm.
as an employer,
Framework, yeah.
I'm
so
surprised.
that you don't have issues with employment legalities. And so that's, and I am a big, it's one of my pet peeves. I really
I'm
prefer.
surprised when I read that, because when I was on the audit committee when Louise Ho was here,
Mhm.
we had recommended and approved that that module be implemented. I was shocked when I read these papers that that had not been done.
Probably.
You were here, Mark, I mean,
Right.
both times, both county people, we recommended that be implemented. And again, I was stunned that it hadn't been.
It probably has to have some someone has to take some education to even
Well, I don't know what
implement
the
it or use
procedure
it.
is from the audit committee, I don't know if we recommended it to the council, but I know that we as a committee had jointly wanted to have this thing implemented, and I'm just surprised that 3 years later it hasn't been done, that's all.
I don't think we got around to some of the things she was planning on doing.
Yeah, could be, I don't know.
Anyway, so that was one thing we.
I didn't even interrupt you,
Remember,
sorry.
it's one thing I kind of remember.
And if I may add, on that portion, as we start the new audit, those will be part of a discussion items, whether it was followed through, or if it was something that we did say we were currently working on, like one of them was the deposits, making sure that those were done timely. That's one thing where we've been implementing and working on throughout
Right.
this year, so they'll look at that again. So like the HR module, that's something that we plan to get that going, even though, yes, we do have fewer employees within the town, but, that put some control in there as far as the HR portion. I mean, we currently do it, but it's manually done between, the HR person to us.
All right, let me read this motion to you, and I will officially get the one that I think I know it well enough, I can modify it from a previous draft. So I move that the Finance Committee recommend approval of the audit of the fiscal year 2013-14 to the City Council, and further, as a policy recommendation, recommend that 2 members of the Finance Committee of the Council meet annually with the auditor as they deem appropriate to review the performance of the personnel connected to the audit, such as the finance director and city manager, as to whether there are any issues that he or she believes the city council should be aware of that are not already been discussed with the town staff, the city manager, or the finance committee. So that's our attempt to have that private discussion that deals specifically with personnel matters. And the other option, if the council isn't comfortable with that, then they could change the motion to read that the full council would meet with the auditor in private, rather than 2 members. George felt that 2 members was permissible, and then you would pass it on to the full council if you felt there was something of substance, and they would have to go into private session to do that. So it's not really up to the council, Mayor, if you want to deal with just 2 members, and if there's nothing significant, then it wouldn't be brought forward, or whether you,
I'm trying to think how we've done it in the past, because I have a feeling that in the past, the 2 council representatives for the audit and the finance committee, actually, before the finance committee was even formed, it was just 2 council members, you know, dealing with the city manager and the auditors. And so in regards to that, they had direct access, if you will. So.
and their discussions were probably,
The discussions of those 2 members, city manager and auditor, were not a public.
were not.
Were not, because it wasn't a quorum.
If I could just add, so typically what we do in other cities is that they would meet, they would send 2 representatives, and sometimes it's the audit committee or the finance committee that we meet with them. And when it comes to the fraud consideration part, we discuss fraud, you know, then usually staff are not present.
Who's not present?
Staff.
Staff.
Yeah, correct.
Or the public?
Correct,
No,
public, yeah.
maybe.
And in some other cities, either the council or the finance committee, they would appoint representative, and we will meet with them, either 2 or 3 of them to have that discussion.
So,
So, yeah, so which is similar to.
But were some of them not council members?
Some of them are audit committees.
So I don't know whether that would,
So it's,
pleasure of the committee, I mean, you have how many members? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7?
yeah, but, oh, you're saying if we had less than a quorum?
Correct. If you had less than a quorum, what you could do is, instead of just the 2 council members, have the 2 council members and 1 member of the finance committee meet with the auditor independently. And that's not a public meeting, independently to discuss any issues that you feel are connected to fraud.
You know, I don't feel comfortable with that. If Bill would give us a 1-paragraph letter that says that's okay, that
It
might
is,
be.
trust me, it's okay.
It's a, yeah,
Huh?
because it's.
Trust me, it's okay.
not a-
Well, not that I don't trust you, but after what we just went through, I want it in writing. I'm a lawyer, and I'm also a
See that?
secretary.
I wrote that and sent it to Bill. Bill said, that looks good to me, send it to you.
Yeah,
So,
well, I just want to make
Pleasure
sure,
of the committee. I'm happy to do that, take it back to the city.
because that would be,
attorney.
a compromise. And then if there was anything, the 2 council members could take it up, and because we couldn't report it back, I guess,
You could,
in the meeting.
you could not report it back at this meeting.
Right. But the council
Correct.
members could do it in private with their fellow
Yeah,
council.
if the council feels that there's a concern with respect to the audit, what they would typically do, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, is they would meet in closed session with the city
Right,
council.
and that's where I really started. I thought that's what the appropriate thing to do was, but it might be an overkill. But if 2 members and the chair or vice chair or whoever we just designate could meet with him,
Mhm.
and then that would be a subject.
As long as it's less than a quorum.
All right, and if you get me a letter on that, we'll adopt it instead of the one I just made. Well, what do you guys think? I mean, this is a committee. What would you feel comfortable with?
Well, I think some action every year that's related to the audit should be performed by somebody regarding competency, cooperation, and audit type, fraud type issues. I mean, now how we do it, I mean, your proposal's fine, but there's other ways to do it, but it should definitely be codified, so to speak, that it's a part of what happens.
What do you think?
I feel comfortable with that.
With the
But,
2
yeah.
council members and the 1 additional member?
And 1 additional, probably would be the chair of the finance committee, I think would be the most logical. And so
Would we want to amend the
Answer.
motion to do that?
yes. I think that would
You think you got that, Mark? The motion?
We've got it.
I will send you a copy of mine, and I will modify it also to incorporate this, and you and I and George can send it back to the members to make sure that that's the same thing we just.
We can't
So-
do it.
So do we need a second on the motion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If so, I'll second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition?
Discussion.
All right, so the modified motion is passed, and
Who initiated the motion?
the mayor.
Should we also have perhaps a briefing on the Brown Act
Yeah, I had thought
for
that
each
this committee had.
person to
We-
ask their questions, and so we have clarity in the future?
Sure.
The
Yes.
city attorney's done that for all the committees, I thought. he'd
Except
done
this
that for the
one.
finance
Except this
committee
one.
as well,
Yeah.
maybe he's done it in the past when it was the audit committee, along. So we'll have him come back and
Yeah.
make a
I think
presentation.
that would be
Very good.
We might like Jennifer instead of.
And-
Well, does anybody else remember getting briefed? I did in the real.
I can assure you, I was not briefed.
I was not.
And I did notice that we're having a briefing for the new committee.
Yes.
If I could have, I would have planned to attend it. But nobody should be serving on one of these committees that hasn't had a briefing.
And that doesn't make them an expert, but it just gives them an awareness.
Well, they've got handouts also.
All right,
You need a
well-
whole rules and procedure binder.
Are we satisfied to excuse our auditor now? I think that's under the Brown Act, we can do that.
Thank you.
Are you sure
Thank you.
you have anything else? We want to limit you in any way.
No.
Okay.
And like I said, next week we're coming out for interim audit, and at the end of it, we would communicate the results of the interim audit to.
Well, if we can, the next time when you report to us next year, we'll go through the audit report, we'll do all your open dialogue about the audit results and all that. And then after that, after the meeting's adjourned, 2 council members and the chair will meet with you separately.
Absolutely. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
And we can, our next finance committee meeting is in July, so if you
Oh,
want to.
is that when-
Yeah.
After the
Yeah.
interim, then you can report whatever from the interim at that meeting in July.
Great. Perfect timing. Yeah.
And do you ever do anything on ethics and conflict of interest for your clients?
For us, in our audit procedures, what we look at is that we make sure that our clients file the conflict of interest form that's been filed timely. So
The 700?
correct, the 700 form. So we do kind of see our clients to make sure that they collected it and and flip through that.
Do you
they
go
are
through
filed
it?
timely.
Do you go through it?
Just to see that they have been filed.
Okay.
Correct.
Because my concern, and we can bring it up later, I guess, but my concern is that somebody's reviewing them. I mean, the FPPC, the Fair Political Practice Committee, gets these forms, and I don't know what they do with them. And I'm really not as concerned as I am for the city of Atherton, whether somebody's looking at them and make sure there's not a conflict of interest. And I would be particularly concerned about the directors and the people that do purchase orders and any of the elected officials. So, all right, well, we appreciate knowing what you're doing, and I think we'll address this at the next meeting.
Okay.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Thank you.
All right, I think that puts that to rest. Why don't we move on with George's presentation on
Yeah, well, we're having a tag team.
the dog and pony show?
We don't have any ponies.
Yeah.
Oh, we have slides. We do have slides.
Shall we?
Do you want to sit over here so you can see
Yeah, I was
it?
gonna say, you might want to sit over here.
Well,
Thank you.
this is just repeating that which we've all read.
Yes, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Here's a copy
Lyndon
of the
would
slides
like
if you
to-
want to run.
I can pull this out if you want to.
No. All right, the city council budget presentation is scheduled for May 20th, which is a week from next Monday. And the city council gets the full detail of the budget and line items within each department and goes through, papers, pencils, pens, everything. So, but the role of the finance committee, and they also talk about visions and goals and individual departmental goals, et cetera. The role of the finance committee isn't to get that finite within the budget. It's more geared toward capital expenditures, long-term strategies, investment strategies, and what the bottom line looks like, a 5-year financial forecast, and those kinds of things that are on the docket today. So you're going to see some things in this initial draft presentation that we're going to move through pretty quickly, and that's because the city council is the body that's going to really weigh in on those sorts of things as policy decisions. So next slide. So first up is kind of the vision and mission of what we believe that Atherton provides to the community. Business should be transparent, accountability, professionalism, open decision-making, clear communication, public trust, respect and civility as we deal with issues in respect to budget and community. Next slide. Through teamwork, unity, collaboration, fiscal responsibility, accountability. These are all the nice, wonderful buzzwords that you hear out there with respect to what your government should be doing for you and how it should be doing it. So we operate on a fund basis, and this is where Robert's going to come in and talk about what that exactly means, different from the private sector.
Yes, and fund basis, basically, the term is fund accounting, and not fund accounting, but fund accounting.
We put the fund back.
Yeah, exactly. And what it is, it's just basically just think of it as separate bank accounts or separate checkbooks that these funds represent. So each fund is designed by a certain type of classification that we have, and the primary funds of what we mostly look at is the governmental funds, which consists of the general fund, which is the main operating account of our town. Special revenue funds that are part, like, that consider like parcel tax, library funds, road construction, different funds for that matter. Other things that we do is capital project funds, that is like storm drainage, we do the Atherton Channel facilities construction. These are account for financial resources used for capital funds or projects that we have. But and also we have proprietary funds, which mainly are the internal service funds, like our equipment replacement fund, governmental liability fund, and all the different funds that have to do with internal service. So those are the major funds that we have.
Before you go on, Robert, this is kind of a broad brush presentation as well, because one of the things I think about when I think about a governmental budget is it's as much a policy document as it is a PR and educational tool. Many members of the community may not understand the differences between the private sector and the public sector with respect to fund accounting. They don't understand how that's a restricted revenue fund. No matter what, we can't use the library fund for something other than the library services. So it's kind of an educational as well. So it may be, many people here on the finance committee understand it, but for other members that, like Naomi, who are interested in learning about the finance committee, it's an educational tool and presentation too.
It's nice if the state of California understood that concept.
Exactly. No, and just comment back on what George was saying, exactly. There's certain funds that are required that you can only spend on certain things. An example is our gas tax funds are one where you can only spend them on streets and roads. So that's one of the basis of fund accounting or funds, that you can only use those certain resources for certain items. So again, our primary operating fund of the town is the general fund. So anything that does not fall into certain funds like gas tax, Measure M, anything that's operational expenses comes out of the general fund. So majority of our general fund revenues are our property taxes, our sales tax is one. Franchise fees that we get is also a source of revenue to the general fund. Then also we have our charges for services, which would be building department fund fees, planning fees, for that matter. And then expenditures for the general fund are most commonly used for all operating expenses, again, that do not fall under different funding mechanisms. And also capital improvement costs, if there's not a fund that would help for resourcing, for resources for a capital project, the general fund would be the funding mechanism for certain projects. And departments that fall under the general fund is the building, planning, public works, administration, police department. So those encompass, those fall all under the general fund. Other cities that have fire departments, that's consistent, and that goes under the general fund operation. Special revenue funds is part of a governmental fund that we use, and these are from specific resources. These are usually required by law, as we discussed, that they be used for certain purposes, and they're separated in a different fund. Hence, we mentioned earlier, like a checking account, considered as a different checking account. And again, examples of those is our library fund, our special parcel tax is put in a separate fund. Equipment replacement fund, again, other special revenue fund would be Measure A, gas tax fund, those different funds are considered special revenue funds.
And our org chart, if you look at our org chart, well, thank you, Robert, you actually corrected the one that's up there in the presentation. In an earlier one, your printout, we're missing Bob Cushing there under Code Enforcement Services, so we've got him back into our budget. It's actually part of our org chart up there. But you can see that we have total full-time positions of 34 staff. That's the same as last year. There's no recommended change in the next year, other than what we'll talk about in terms of the police budget. Those aren't actually filled positions, but they're recruitable positions. The dashed lines around the boxes there indicate areas where we contract for services. The soft lines indicate where we have actual staff members of the town filling those roles.
What's a CSO?
Community service officer. There's somebody who will go out and assist the police with taking police reports and deals in interfacing with code enforcement services. And if there is a custody issues or child protection issues, dealing with those outside agencies. Well, we have numerous policymakers and advisors, just like any other community. That begins and ends with the city council, but below them are the planning commission, this committee, the audit finance committee, parks and rec, environmental programs, transportation, rail, community center advisory committee. Those are the local committees. But regionally, we've got a number of groups that the council and staff participate on, to include